Welcome to the new Chemist podcast.
Bienvenidos al podcast del nuevo químico.
Καλώς ήρθατε στο podcast του New Chemist. Welkom bij de podcast van The New Chemist.
Bienvenue sur le podcast du nouveau chimiste.
Bem-vindo ao podcast do novo químico.
Welcome to the new Chemist podcast. Work hard. Be value-driven. You can do it. You can grow and learn it. You can be the difference you and your community needs. Don't give up. We are here, rooting and cheering for you. Don't give up.
Travaillez dur. Soyez axés sur la valeur. Tu peux le faire. Vous pouvez grandir et l'apprendre. Vous pouvez être la différence dont vous et votre communauté avez besoin. N'abandonnez pas. Nous sommes ici pour vous encourager et vous encourager. N'abandonnez pas.
Trabalhar duro. Seja orientado por valores. Você consegue. Você pode crescer e aprender. Você pode ser a diferença que você e sua comunidade precisam. Não desista. Estamos aqui torcendo e torcendo por você. Não desista.
Δούλεψε σκληρά. Να οδηγείτε στην αξία. Μπορείς να το κάνεις. Μπορείτε να μεγαλώσετε και να το μάθετε. Μπορείτε να είστε η διαφορά που χρειάζεστε εσείς και η κοινότητά σας. Μην τα παρατάς. Είμαστε εδώ για να σας ζητοκραυγάσουμε. Μην τα παρατάς.
Trabaja duro. Sea impulsado por el valor. Puedes hacerlo. Puedes crecer y aprenderlo. Usted puede ser la diferencia que usted y su comunidad necesitan. No te rindas, estamos aquí animándote y animándote. No te rindas.
Werk hard. Wees waardegedreven. Je kunt het. Je kunt groeien en leren. U kunt het verschil zijn dat u en uw gemeenschap nodig hebben. Geef niet op. We zijn hier om voor je te roten en te juichen. Geef niet op.
Work hard. Be value-driven. You can do it. You can grow and learn it. You can be the difference you and your community needs. Don't give up. We are here rooting and cheering for you. Don't give up. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is the New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guest and I. it's hard to find creative ways to keep the kids busy and screen-free while stretching their brains, especially these days. Mel Science does all the legwork for you, so you can spend more quality time tackling projects together, and they won't even know they're learning. With Mel Science, there's something for every kid. We've just received some awesome Mel Chemistry sets, but also there is Mel Kids, Mel Physics, Mel Med, and Mel STEM sets, and they are all for different age groups. We can't wait to get started with the kit we have received. Get 60% off your first box of any of the subscriptions by using the promo code Chemist for the first month for any of Mel Science's subscriptions, but it will only be active for 1 month. You can find the link in the episode description. Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you listened. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms, including Odyssey. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as careers, community research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Chadwin Hanna. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Chadwin is a good colleague of mine. We went to high school together. He was the former head boy before I was the head boy in 2014. He was the head boy in 2013. Chadwin is a graduate of Kettering University, where he majored in mechanical engineering with a specialty in bioengineering applications. He also has a minor in biochemistry. He comes from a diverse cultural background, having received his secondary education in Freeport, the Bahamas, at the great Bishop Michael Eldon School, and pursued his post-secondary studies in the USA. He is determined to use his knowledge of engineering and the human body to leave a lasting impact on the world of medicine and most importantly, the lives of people for whom this industry exists. Like I said earlier, Chadwin's a good colleague and a good friend of mine. It is a pleasure and an honor to have such a bright young man on this podcast today. Thank you so much, Chadwin, for joining me today. It's so good to have you on as a guest. Well, me and Chadwin go way back to high school, all the way back to high school. And he was a former head boy before me, and I was the head boy after him. And we also knew each other from just being in science together. So, Chadwin, as we begin, what have been your long-standing interests in the field of science?
So, thanks for having me on the podcast. Great that we could connect like this. But science, like you said, from high school, we were kind of always interested in science together, you know. From as early as I can remember, I think I had a desire to be a physician. And that just like led into this interest that I had in science, whether it was biology, chemistry. It's like, I want to be a doctor, and medicine is very cool to me. So I just gravitated to all the fields of science. Eventually that led to me going to do my bachelor's and become a mechanical engineer. And that led me down a whole other path into the medical device industry and really understanding how things work, being an innovator. And now I find myself right back in medical school, where what I wanted to do from, like I said, as far as I can remember. So it's always been science, man.
It's very good. That's very good. So my question to you is, I want to hit on like immediately. How do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? So when you face challenges and obstacles, which I'm sure you have, how do you maintain view of the bigger picture and keep your goal in focus?
I think a big thing for me is knowing what my goal is, right? And if you don't have a clear picture of your goal before you set out on your journey, then it's even not much harder to keep it in sight. You don't know what you're looking at. Okay. For me, before I went to undergrad, I knew like, hey, I want to be a neurosurgeon. And I knew I didn't necessarily know the path that I would take to get there, but I knew like, hey, this is what I want to do. That path took me, like I said, through Kettering University. I studied mechanical engineering, did a minor in biochemistry. When I graduated from Kettering, I ended up in Miami working for Johnson & Johnson as an R&D engineer, making neurovascular devices for stroke treatment, which was an offset of what I eventually want to do as a physician. But I was able to look at it from a completely different perspective as an engineer. So I think with the bigger goal in mind that, hey, I want to be a neurosurgeon, right? Like I was taking a step back and making the devices that neurosurgeons use, so that later on in my career, like this will make me an even better neurosurgeon because I know how to make the tools and I know how to use them.
Yeah.
So I think it's just keeping the vision in mind and not necessarily getting caught up in the past, right? I know a lot of undergrads going into medical school, they get kind of stressed when it comes to gap years and understanding like, hey, like I need to get to medical school ASAP. I don't want a gap year, or I just want one gap year. I took 4 gap years. That wasn't like planned. That wasn't in the plan, right? But I got into something. I loved what I was doing, and I was learning, and I was in an environment where I could really like grow and flourish. And it was something that I thought I needed to do before going to med school, and I love it. I think it made me a better person, but always have the bigger goal in mind. Like I said, keep it on your head, and everything that you do should be in progress of that goal. Everything.
Yeah, I completely agree. Precision.
Yeah.
You hit around the target, you come closer and closer to the ultimate precision. So how have you been adaptive and creative in the fields of science? In what way? You served as an R&D engineer. Are you currently still serving as an R&D engineer?
Yeah, so I'm currently still spending a few hours working with my R&D colleagues at J&J.
Okay,
which
good.
has been a blessing, right? It's also, it's a time balance. I'm in medical school. I'm in an MD-PhD program. And I'm still doing some work in the field. I mean, it's great for me because I get to use 2 different sides of my brain, studying all this medicine, like really science side, but I'm also still doing some engineering, which is great. But I think to answer your question, I just kind of take it day by day, you know? Like every day looks a little different. Okay. And you just kind of gotta be, for me, I take it day by day so as to not stress myself out with the like enormity of the tasks that there are to face, right? Knowing, like I said, keeping the big goal and picture is great. Keep it in mind, keep it in focus, but at the same time, it's hard to look at that all the time. It's hard to look at this huge, grandiose thing. Sometimes you just got to take it apart and look at it section by section. That's what I try to do, day by day. Yeah,
I completely agree with you. So, because I've heard several things. You have to be pragmatic. There's a quote that says, if you want to eat an elephant, eat it one bite at a time. And also, when it comes to anatomy, unless you're doing gross anatomy, most times you look at anatomy like one system at a time, one part of the body at a time, so you can really understand what's going on. So yeah, I completely agree with you. So how do you seek or find the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? What led you to Johnson & Johnson? How did you get there? And also what led you to the UF? And how did you get there as an MD-PhD candidate?
Cool. I think a big thing for me, I'll tell a story in a minute, but I think the biggest thing is the people, man. In order to learn, I think 2 things have to be true. 1, you have to be in a mental space and understand that you want to learn. So you have to have the desire to learn. And 2, you have to be in an environment that fosters your learning, right? If both of those things aren't there, then learning isn't going to happen. It isn't something that just happens. You can't just sit in the classroom and learn if you don't want to be there. You're not going to learn. You also can't just sit in the classroom, even if you want to learn and the environment isn't great, you're not going to learn.
And you have the capability as well.
Right. You got to have the capability. So for me, one of the big things I look at is the environment. Like, is this a space where I can grow, where I can learn, and where the people are going to help me to foster my growth and my learning. So for me, while I was in school, I was co-oping for a company called Ethicon Endosurgery, which was also part of Johnson & Johnson at the time.
Right.
That's when I first got into the medical device industry. I was making laparoscopic devices. I was like doing R&D, engineering work, research and design as a sophomore in college.
Okay, good.
It was great, right? So right there, I was working with a group of people that really trusted my ability, trusted the things that I was doing, and allowed me and gave me the space to grow, learn, make mistakes, right? But also make my thoughts and my opinions be heard, which I think is
very important.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's extremely important. It's like
one
to be heard and seen, right? So I stayed at Ethicon for a while. I actually did 4 different rotations there because, like I said, the environment was amazing, and I just love working for J&J as a company, the credo of the company, what it stands for, and I understood like, hey, I'm doing engineering because I want to help people, and I'm doing it in the medical device field.
Okay.
And this is going to benefit my career later. So after I graduated, I wanted to stay with J&J. Unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to go back to Ethicon. So I was looking, which ended up being great for me in the long term. I found this company in Miami called Cerenovus, and they designed neurovascular device. It was a J&J company. I applied and I got like an interview in like a week. They told me to fly down there. I flew down there, and the environment was like, it was electric. I walk in the lab, there's engineers working. They have doctors visiting very often. People are bouncing information back and forth. People are asking me what I think about things that are going on, and I'm just there for an interview. So I'm like, this is an environment that would be great for me. That's kind of why I ended up there.
Sounds good.
Because, like I said, it's all the people, the environment, people able to foster your growth and your learning. Yeah, and that's also why I ended up at UF. UF, when I was looking at MD-PhD programs, I really wanted something that's collaborative, where physicians are working with researchers, where like people are on the cutting edge of science. There's a lot of clinical studies going on. Mm-hmm. People are actually actively trying to make a difference in the field, and UF was the fit for me.
Good, good. Having a strong sense of agency and also having the capacity to jump from one S-curve to the next. So as you learn and plateau, you learn, gain the skills, plateau, become comfortable in the environment, and you jump to another one where you're jumping S-curve to S-curve. That's good. It's very good.
Yeah.
So what have been your most effective and impactful ideas to date? What have you complemented to in terms of, so let me make this more practical. So you worked at J&J. Yeah, you worked at J&J. Yeah. How did you add your flair to the environment? What complements you adding your flair?
That's a good question. I'm always me. And I think that's great. I found that for me as an engineer, I'm an innovator, and I love to be efficient.
How did you do that?
I had just kind of like what I said about the goal, having a big goal and breaking it into chunks.
Granularities.
Like, if I see a task, I have to break it into smaller pieces. Mm-hmm. I have to. I had a mentor at Ethicon that called me an optimizer, because anytime she'd give me a problem, I'd be like, there has to be an easier way to do this. Like that, there has to be an easier way to do it. And that's how I face problems daily. If something is going on, I'm like, wait, there has to be an easier way to do this. Yeah. There has to be a more efficient way to do it. If it's a process,
the hill to climb, eh?
Right. If there's a process, let's say in manufacturing, I'm like, wait, only one person can do this? How can we optimize it so that multiple people can do it? How can we get it done quicker? And you asked, how do I add my flair in that environment? I think that one of the most important things, especially in regards to innovation, whether it's science or industry, is just having diversity of thought and diversity of everything. Yeah. Diversity is so important. Me, of course, I was the only, at the time, I was the only Black R&D engineer working in that office in Miami, which was great. And I was like the youngest person working there as well as an R&D engineer. of course, I was the only person from the Bahamas. So all these different factors of diversity just influenced the way that I was thinking completely differently from everyone else, right? I think that is so important. So if I'm forming a team, I'm always thinking about, like, where can I grab diversity from? Who's thinking differently than I am? I don't want a bunch of Chadwins on my team, even though I think I'm great. I don't want a bunch.
Nothing wrong with that, bro. I feel the same way.
I want like as many different people as possible. So, and I work with people who really care about what I have to say.
Yeah, that's
and good. I think that's like a part of respect, and also trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trust in that, like, I know what I'm talking about when I say something.
Yeah,
it's hard to find that. You could work forever and, like, don't find a group of people that trust you.
Yeah, that's true. And so several things come up. One, you have to build your voice, and you build your voice through having a good grasp of your field and having good acumen and good knowledge and good skills that are relevant to the area of expertise or the area that you're working in. So that's one thing that comes up. Trust. I've heard people say the success of an organization goes, or is one of the factors that complements the success is trust, and the speed of trust in the environment influences the path and trajectory of the organization. That's that. 2, and then 3. What you said you brought up a key point: being yourself. You know, we could all try to be someone else, but at the end of the day, the best person we can be, and I think this is an established fact, is yourself. There's something unique in your personhood that complements you being able to do that well. So that's good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain a balanced life given all your responsibilities and accomplishments? Are you balanced, Chadwin?
I try to be, man.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So how do you manage it? How do you manage your time? How do you manage your workload? That's a practical way to do this. To answer this question.
So for me, currently, like, being in an MD-PhD program, when I started, I mean, obviously I was living in Miami. I had a lot of free time, working in industry. As soon as I got off of work, I was off work, and I really took time to have, like, mental space to myself. So being out of school for 4 years, coming back into what I know is a really intense program, I'm not sacrificing my own mental health. I'm just not. Like, I understand that medical school is hard. And some people would say, like, oh, like, I'm being arrogant or I'm being cocky because I'm not sacrificing my mental health, but I'm just not. So, because a lot of people do. Because a lot of people feel like that's the only way that you can make it in medical school. You have to be up and study for 12 hours every day or 14 hours. If you're not studying on the weekends, then what are you doing? But I think that everyone has to find their niche and understand what they need to do in order to succeed. And for me, what I've found, like, in this environment is that people compare themselves to others. Like, I need to be studying this much, or I need to be studying in this way, and don't really take the time to find what works for them. So a big thing for me is, like I said, I wasn't in school for like 4 years. So coming into it, I really tried to figure out, like, what's gonna work for me. Am I gonna go to class? So I started to go to class every day. Mm-hmm. Like, is this gonna work for me? Mm-hmm. And then some days I would sit home and watch lectures from the computer. I'm like, this doesn't work for me. I need to be in class every day. This is active learning that I'm doing. I have an exam every 2 weeks. I'm like, how am I gonna study for this? Am I gonna study every night? No, that's kind of stressful for me. Let me develop a schedule, develop a plan, and, like, I know when I'm gonna go through this material. That's been really helpful for me.
It's good, dude.
Like I said, I've been planning. I have time for myself in my planner, which I think is extremely important. If you don't make the time for your own mental health, then it won't exist.
Wow. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, dude, I completely agree with you. You know, mental health is so important. 1, 2, you made the joke of if you're not sacrificing your mental health, and you said some people might say it's arrogant or cocky. Dude, you know, at the end of the day, people will say what they have to say. You have to live with you. So I don't pay it no mind. But people's opinions have merit, but it doesn't float or sink your boat, eh? So the reality is, this is the thing that I think, or what you said is so important. You said people compare themselves a lot in that environment. My thing is, this is the question I raise for instances like that. If academic merit is comparative in the absolute sense, what happens when the things you are comparing are gone? Does the merit still exist? You have to have some type of you have to have some individual merit in that you are trying to be a better you. That's another way to put that. You're trying to be a better person, just a better version of you every single day. So that's good. Yeah. How have you maintained?
You got to show up as you every day, man.
Yeah. I agree with you. My thing is, if the only time you could have merit is when you compare, what's the point? How have you maintained vision and teamwork in the environment?
Like I said earlier, I think, especially in engineering, it's like teamwork is like you can't do anything by yourself. I learned that a long time ago. It's the same, and I can't name one thing where you can actually do something alone. You can't. Medicine is like that. Science is like that. And I already explained about having diverse minds and people from different backgrounds on your team. What I think it really is understanding how to work well as a team, right? So you can bring all these different people together, but if you don't have a structure of like, how do we flow together? What are the responsibilities of each person? How do these people work together and be as efficient as possible to deal with the task at hand? Then that's a problem. So really, when it's like teamwork is the lifestyle. Like nothing exists but teamwork. I think I spent a lot of time in my teams really trying to be as efficient as possible, using each person's skills, expertise to like really promote and like bring the task at hand to fruition, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree.
I try to show up as like the best person that I can within that team as well, right? Because I'm there for a reason. So like, what do you need me to do? How can I use my expertise to make this happen?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, dude. It's very important. So do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you're currently working in? What's your advice to people listening?
My advice is just, especially for those applying to MD-PhD program, extremely difficult to get it.
Yeah.
An MD program, it's hard. It's getting harder to become a doctor. Like I'm talking to professors and they're like, it's just hard. It's hard. I've talked to professors and they're like, I don't know if I would get into medical school today. Like, kudos to you guys. And I think in generations coming, it's just going to be harder and harder. So for me, this is actually, I applied to MD-PhD program twice. I didn't get accepted in the last cycle. I got accepted in this cycle. And the fact that I reapplied shows the one thing that I would give people advice to is like, know what you want to do and keep on doing it. Yeah. You can't let failures stop you from like achieving your goals. You just can't. You have to be persistent.
Yeah, bro.
You have to have some level of grit because it is hard.
You have to be stubborn.
You have to be stubborn because people are gonna try to stop you.
Mm-hmm. Like, you will have obstacles.
People will drop walls in front of you to stop you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. But see, the thing with that, I acknowledge that. When this is how I approach things like that, you could throw the obstacles in my path. At the end of the day, you're not sovereign. My faith perspective kicks in for that. So yeah, it's just an obstacle. It's just a hill to climb. So right. What has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received? What's some good advice you've gotten from your parents or teachers, professors? What's helped you get through hard times? What goes through your mind when someone drops a wall in your path?
It's like my dad would always tell me, like, to not ever let anyone stop you from achieving your goals. Yeah, and that like reverberates in my head daily. Okay. Like, I will never let anyone tell me that I cannot do something.
Oh yeah.
Right? I mean, of course, work within the guise of like what's capable. Like, is this realistic? Can you set realistic goals for yourself? Yes. And if I think it's realistic versus if you think it's realistic, then we have a clash, right? I'm never gonna let you prove me wrong. unless it is something that's not realistic. And that in that regard, you have to know when to humble yourself as well.
Humility is important.
Right?
Yeah, it's very important.
You have to know when, like, am I overreaching? And you have to give space for someone to actually come in and tell you, hey, like, maybe you are doing a little bit too much. Let me explain why, right? Which takes a lot. It takes a lot, because I just said I won't let anyone ever come in my way of doing something that I want to do. But at the same time, there's a balance, and I don't know everything. I just don't.
Neither do I, and that's okay.
I just don't.
Just keep learning. It's a growth. Beneficial. Sorry for cut you off, but the beneficial mindset, I think, is a growth mindset. It's healthy, especially in these spaces. So, as you were saying, you said it's a balance, right?
Yeah, it's a balance. What I was gonna say is, like, you might have a wall in front of you, and you might want to climb that wall, or you might want to go through that wall, but someone knows what's on the other side of the wall, and they're like, wait, maybe you want to plan a little bit before you just go ahead and jump. Like, you got to be able to listen to that person.
Yeah, you have to be teachable. I completely agree. You have to be teachable. You have to give space for the right influences to have influence in your life. That's good. So, man, Chadwin, thank you so much for joining me today. It was so good to have you on as a guest. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is the New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I. Thanks, Janae, for joining me today. It's so good to have you on, Janae. It's a good time to have Janae on as a guest on this podcast. So welcome to the New Chemist. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a variety of other platforms. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is a science of change, as well as careers, community research, and COVID-19. We're so happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Janae Burrows, an MD-PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. So me and Janae go way back, like way back, like all the way back to high school. I mean, that's a long time ago. That's like 7 years ago or 8 years ago now. Eight. Yeah. So, I mean, Janae is currently studying medicine. She's done a BA at Liberty University. And she's a really intelligent young lady, and it's really good to have her on. She's a leader in her own age, stage, and right. So it's definitely a pleasure and an honor to have Janae on this podcast. So Janae, what have been your long-standing interests in the field of science?
Well, David, first, thank you for letting me be here. It's a pleasure. I would say that my long-standing interests, one being in the fact that I am studying medicine and I am 1 year out from my MD-PhD degree, and I'll finally be a doctor fully. My long-standing interest is just to advocate for patients and to give them the tools that they need to create healthier lifestyle and healthier livings, to decrease hospitalizations, and so that they can live a good life. More importantly, though, in the field of medicine, I think that my long-standing interests also have to do with mentoring and mentorship with pre-medical students as well as medical students, because I truly believe in diversity in medicine. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the statistics, there are only about 5% of Black physicians in the world. And that number itself is astounding. And I feel like there are a lot of unrepresented minorities in medicine. Mm-hmm. And my what drives me is being able to mentor those behind, because I know that for me, I didn't really get the mentorship that I think that I needed through my journey. So
okay,
those are my interests.
okay, that's interesting that you say that. So mentoring and also diversity. So that's good. That's good. And decreasing hospitalizations. So I'll just offer that same question. What I'll ask you is, how were you able to overcome the barrier in which you didn't have access to a lot of mentoring? How did you overcome that? How did you get through that?
Well, a lot of that had to do with confidence in myself and just overcoming the barriers that people placed on me. And I will never forget, there have been speed bumps along the road. Like, for instance, when I was in college at Liberty University, I was two person. So during the third year, fourth year, you're deciding what you want to do. You're applying to schools if you want to do like a postgraduate education. And I had asked my advisor what he thought about me applying to medical school. I wanted some guidance on how to go about it. And basically he told me that he didn't think I should apply for medicine.
Wow.
I think he had told me, he gave me a different suggestion of what he thought I should do. And I also remember my organic chemistry teacher. Now, organic chemistry was, it was tough. And the professor that I had, he was also very tough. But I asked him for a letter of recommendation because I did think that I displayed, good
aptitude,
skills, right? And he basically told me, he said, I think you should, I wouldn't write you a letter of recommendation to go to medical school, but I think maybe you should do nursing or something.
Wow.
And
look at you now, almost finished with your MBBS. Take that.
Yes. And at every level, I think that there are persons who are going to try to discourage you and dissuade you from doing what you want to do. But for me, I realized that I had to take control of my future and what I wanted to do and carve out those paths for myself, even if others weren't willing to help me do that. So those are some of the ways that I've overcome that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting you bring that up, and we'll discuss more about that in the podcast. But I've listened. Just a quick note on that. I've listened to some leaders mention in their discussions or in their speeches, how they were trying to apply to some Ivy League school, and someone looked at them and told them they were not cut out for that. And come to find out, they attended 2 different Ivy League institutions, Princeton and Harvard. And they've done really well. So yeah, you can't let people chart your course. You chart your own course.
Yes.
So
I find that just like another note is that sometimes those persons who tell you no and who try to shut the door in your face, that just gives you the fuel that you need to continue going.
You have to reappropriate that. Reappropriate that and use that as fuel. Some people coin that off, describe it as the "I'll show you" response. You said I can't do it, so I'm gonna show you that you're not the last word on my destiny. So how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? How do you keep perspective, Janae? Especially speak about the time in which you were dealing with COVID and all this other good stuff, or bad stuff, however you want to phrase that.
So honestly, it's difficult sometimes to keep perspective. I will say that. And during my time studying, like you said, COVID, but even before COVID, after my first year of medical school, I was back home in the Bahamas, and I was supposed to leave, actually. I was scheduled to leave, but I stayed behind for like a family wedding and something. And that's when Dorian hit. And I was stuck in the storm. And I think the fear surrounding that in and of itself was just out of the norm, because that was my first major hurricane at home. And, the hurricane stood still for like 2 days. Yeah, 72 hours. Yeah. And after the hurricane, it was just devastating destruction. I was happy at the time to be home with my family, because I thought about what would I have done if I was in school at that time. But I was just thinking, I'm supposed to go back and leave my family in a time of crisis, And I actually had to, so I helped out. I tried to do some volunteering before I left, but I had to take basically a refugee flight out to Nassau. Oh. And then I had to go back to school. And I think that year itself was a lot of tragedy. I lost one of my cousins as well in a tragic accident. And along the way, I think it made me realize that medicine kind of takes some things from you, the journey itself, because you're away from family. There are big life-changing events that are happening when you're studying for this thing that you're supposed to be dedicating your life to, but you're missing moments. And so I had to look at it in a different perspective, in that this will pass, and that this is just a stop that I need for the rest of my life. So it's difficult keeping perspective, because when you're in the midst of it, even in COVID, when you're in the midst of COVID, it's like, this is something terrible. But for me, COVID allowed me to come back home and be with my family for a little while. And I hadn't been able to do that for so long. So it's keeping the perspective in that, yes, bad things do happen, or things are occurring, and it may not be something that you enjoy or that you like, but realizing that everything is working for your good. That's how I have to look at it, that everything is aligning itself for the better, for a bigger purpose.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And it's interesting that you bring that up. Because no matter for academic paths, whether it be postgraduate or even undergraduate, many times you are missing things as you prepare or as you go through those journeys. You're missing things. But this is, and you just have to acknowledge that. But I think that's a part of the sacrifice that you make because of the reward you want on the latter end of the journey. So just for example, you could think about the grocery store. There's a sacrifice that you have to make when you go to the grocery store. You could be doing something else, but you need groceries to cook and to eat. So So how have you been adaptive and creative in the fields of science? Where would you say you have been creative? Where's Janae's creativity come about?
So I'm always trying to think of things that I can do differently, or change or make things better. In terms of creative, one thing that it has been my little creative outlet is I started a blog back in 2019. So this would have been right after the hurricane. I had started a blog. I always wanted to do it because, like I said, I'm interested in mentorship and inspiring the younger generation, paying it forward. And so I had started a blog where I document my journey through medicine. And that's a way that I basically have a little creative outlet, but I still get the opportunity to share my passions of medicine, food, whatever it is. It's the checkuplog.com. And that's something that I am neglecting, actually, just because of the stress of school and everything else. But that's one way that I've been creative.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to have a blog. I've seen a lot of people on YouTube who do the exact same thing, so people could follow along with you as you're going through it and make it more enjoyable. I think not just for the person themselves, but also for the people who are watching you and cheering you on. So that's good. Yeah. So how did you seek or find the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? How did you seek it, or how have you complemented to the environment being a place where you can thrive?
So, that's such an interesting question. So in some instances, it wasn't really a choice in terms of seeking out, like, for instance, school. I know for college, I didn't really choose where I went to college, but I think regardless of the environment, I've always tried to find individuals or clubs that I can grow and, mature in, where I can be surrounded with people who are at the same intellectual level, who can inspire me and encourage me to do better. So in college, I actually created the Caribbean Student Union at the Caribbean Student Association at Liberty. Okay. And so that was one way that I was able to find, people that I could, be inspired and be around them. Now here in medical school, one way that I have kind of been able to find the environment to grow is through community service. Yeah. So I'm the student representative for the American College of Physicians. Okay. With internal medicine at my university. And so one thing that we like to do is community outreach events. And most notably, one of the things that we recently did, we went to a Haitian church in the community. And they wanted us to do a clinic there because a lot of the members don't go to clinic due to various reasons, whether they're scared of immigration or they don't think that they'll be treated fairly. So we did a clinic there, and we were able to serve almost 100 persons and give them their checkups, their blood glucose, screen for hypertension and diabetes and all those stuff, and just counsel them with health. So that's something that I'm also passionate about, and that's something that fuels me. And so finding, those individuals who are willing to come out and service the community in that way has been very important to me. And also, so that's just some of the ways that I've been able to surround myself with people who can help me to thrive in those environments.
Okay, yeah, that's good. You're the student representative for the American College of Physicians in terms of internal medicine. That's good, Janema. That's good. So what have been your most effective and impactful ideas to date? What would you say what idea that you're using now, or what strategy that you're using now has got you this far in terms of being a medical school candidate at the University of the West Indies? What strategy, what time management strategy, what technique, what study approach, what's helped you get this far?
I would say that there's two things, probably. The first one is to always be adaptable. Okay. And whether that's in my study methods, whether that's in, in the hospital, just learning how to interact with different people, you want to be adaptable because there are various different personalities that you will encounter at the hospital. There are so many different things that you will encounter just anywhere in the world. And so I think being adaptable has helped me to get so far. Also discipline, but just being adaptable, as well as just continuing to never stop learning. So obviously I'm in medical school, so there's just a lot of information that I have to learn. But I think in life in general, being able to be willing to continue learning and to continue unlearning things that are not serving you. So I'm actually reading this very good book right now called Think Again. And it basically talks about the ability to unlearn things that are not getting you ahead and be willing to learn new things. So there are some things that we learn as children or that our parents teach us that they learn from their parents. But in this current generation, some of those things just won't cut it, So you have to be willing to kind of shed those things and learn new things. And in medicine, of course, I'm just always reading and I'm always trying to build on the knowledge that I have because it'll serve me. And it's honestly so surprising how many times I'll remember something or I'll be able to think of a concept that I can't remember, but I read it maybe 5 years ago. And so those are the two things: basic adaptability and being able to learn new things.
Yeah, that's good. So I could relate to that too. In terms of, when I was in organic chemistry, one of the things I would do, I had a favorite show on Discovery Channel called Gold Rush. And I used one of the characters to come up with a mnemonic for one of the regioselective rules. So in terms of Hoffman's rule or Zeiss's rules, for example, there was a character named Todd Hoffman. So tert butoxide T, Hoffman. Therapeutic oxide facilitates Hoffman's rule of results. Products follow Hoffman's rule when you use it. So outside this, I can relate to that a lot. So Janae, how do you maintain a balanced life given all your responsibilities and accomplishments? So how do you keep your priorities in check? How do you stay level during all of this?
It's very difficult, David. It's so difficult. I think that I'm honestly always juggling something. Okay. And I recently saw this quote. I shared this little thing on social media, and it basically said, I'm trying to juggle things financially, but I'm always also trying to get enough sleep. And I'm trying to keep on top of my work, and I'm also trying to spend time with my family. So it's a constant push and pull. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that I have perfected it. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that you will never truly find a balance, but it's just realizing that certain seasons in your life require a different balance. So right now for me, I am finishing up medical school, and more of my time is required to just finish and prepare for the next step. Mm-hmm. But also I try to balance it by spending time with my family, and I'm blessed that now I'm back in the Bahamas, and so I'm able to spend a lot more time with my nieces and see my family a little bit more often. Mm-hmm. And so where my cup is being poured out at work, I'm able to come home and get my cup filled up again. And so I think that is a balance that has been working for me. Like I'm not reading as much as I want to read. I still don't get to catch up on my Netflix shows like I want to, but I am satisfied that the push and pull is working for me right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's a balance, but I have not reached that equilibrium as yet, but it's working for me.
That's good. I like what you said. Different seasons of your life require a different set of priorities that you have to work through. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. So how have you been successful as a student? How did you get into UE? Like UE is a good school in the Caribbean. How did you get into UE? And how have you gotten this far? Like how were you able to stay in this long for UE to be close to finishing? So how did you get through? What if you were to break down your success thus far to date in UE and at Liberty, what would you say has complemented tremendously? Will it be networking, time management, study skills, your friends, the clubs you are part of? What has complemented to your success?
So I will say probably the number one thing is discipline.
Discipline, okay.
Yeah, so I've always been a very disciplined person, but just continuing to keep that discipline, and I don't know, it's a discipline thing, I would say. Even to get into UE, I did well in my pre-medical courses, and a lot of the applications too were looking at community service outreach and letters of recommendation, all that stuff. So I was always involved in community service at Liberty. Mm-hmm. And even back home, like when I would come home, I would do community service things. And so I think that kind of helped in getting into UE. I had applied to 2 of the schools, but I wanted to go to Jamaica because I think that the Jamaica campus is the best one. Jamaica. Yeah. And so when I got in, I will say, when I had applied, I was very nervous and I didn't think that I was going to get in. Okay. I think it was more of an imposter syndrome thing where I didn't think I was going to get in, and I was waiting for them to reply to me, and I honestly had like a little midlife crisis and thinking, if I don't get in, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Like, David, honestly, I spoke to my parents and I was like, I don't know if I should apply to dentistry school. Like, do I really want to be a doctor? Like, and they had to basically say, Janae, you've done everything that you can. You have applied. You've worked hard. Just leave it up to God.
Yeah.
And yeah, like there's a whole other story about like my whole UE application thing. Mm-hmm. But when I got the letter that said that I got in, I was ecstatic. and I was ecstatic. Now, staying in UE, I don't think that it's as hard as
getting in.
No, I just don't think it's as hard as people make it seem. Like, yes, medical school is tough. But I will say with anything, it's a constant building on what you've learned the prior year and continuing to build and being able to continue reading. Like, UWE's motto is read for your degree, and they mean you will read. So I think I can't all contribute it to myself, though. I will say having a good set of friends who are able to study with you and go over questions, like, that's vital. Surrounding yourself with the right people, I think that's incredibly important, as well as networking. That also is a factor. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to being disciplined and having a goal in mind. And I've always been a very goal-oriented person, and looking at the future, like, you know, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do that by any means necessary. So if I need to put in the work, I will put in the work. And I think that is what's kept me going so far. And just realizing how close I am to finishing, because time has flown by and I'm so close. And so it's like, I'm not gonna give up now. It's like, I'm almost there.
There you go. I can't give up now. That's good. This is good. I feel like I'm getting inspired. I have to re-listen to this. Just that one snippet. That is good. That is good. So how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment? How you keep the collaborative spirit going with your friends and stuff like that? What do you do in med school to keep it going?
So one of the things that my friends and I do, we try to, it depends on like whatever rotation we're on, but we definitely try to go over questions, you know, when we're coming up to the exam. Right. And we're always trying to bounce ideas off of each other, because at the end of the day, there might be something that I'm strong in where my other friend isn't strong in. And I can explain that to her, and vice versa. I may not understand something and they may understand it and they can explain it to me. And so it's just being collaborative with each other. And I realized that collaboration is better than competition. You know, all of us have the same goal in mind. We all just want to graduate. And at the end of the day, you know, having that team mentality, it's not just about helps to translate to even with your patients, you know. It's because when you finish medical school and you're working on the wards, you're working with a team, and so you have to have the adaptability to work as a team player. And I think you know, having those study groups with my friends and having, you know, being able to text each other and ask, okay, so what do you think about this, and sharing stories about sharing like case reports of
case
patients,
studies, high level thinking, case studies,
like, so that helps a lot with everything. So that's how I've maintained teamwork.
And also, one of the things I found, some of the most progressive or really advancing clinics, they're multidisciplinary. They have a variety of people, a plethora of specialties working together to solve the cases, and different perspectives. When you have a high degree of expertise, though the perspectives may be different, when they are good in their craft, that complements to solving the issue, or at least ameliorating the condition. So yeah, that's good. So why did you choose MBBS as opposed to dentistry or any other path? What made you choose medicine? Why medicine?
From I was 6, I think, maybe 5 or 6, I always wanted to be a doctor. I think it might have been partly due to the fact that my uncle, Dr. Hayward Cooper, was a obstetric gynecologist. And so I don't know if that kind of contributed to it, but I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor. And going through school, I think it was just something that I gravitated towards. I always loved the sciences. You know, me and you were in physics and chem and all of that.
Every class together.
And even in college, it was just something that I enjoy. But in terms of choosing between dentistry and like medicine, I don't really like teeth, and I don't think I could spend my days looking in people, you know, mouths. But just having that patient interaction with someone and being able to, you know, fix something for them, to make someone better than you left them, you know. Someone and their, you know, there's something wrong and you're able to aid in
The
fixing
solution
that.
process, yeah.
I think that is what really drove me towards medicine. Now, MBBS versus MD in the US, it just made financial sense to me, to be home and to have a cheaper tuition. It made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So after I finish, I will have to do some additional training, and who knows if I'll go to the US. But MBBS just felt it was the best choice for me.
Yeah, and it's, I think, an established fact, some of the best doctors in the Bahamas have passed through UE.
Yes.
The best. One of the former prime ministers, as well as one of the leading obstetrician gynecologists on Grand Bahama, they passed through UE. So the fact that the evidence,
evidence is clear.
The evidence is clear. Opinions might vary, but when you base your decisions and opinions on the facts are clear.
Yes.
Some good doctors come out of UE, so that's a fact. So do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue what you're currently working on? What is the advice to someone who sees this and says, wow, Janae is really doing a good job. How can I do what Janae is doing? What would be your advice to them? I want to go to medical school. I'm in the Bahamas or I'm in the Caribbean, and I want to go to UE. What's your advice to them?
My advice is to not give up. If it's something that you want to do, continue to pursue it, and pursue it with all your might. And doors will open for you when you are persistent. Continue striving, whatever thing you can do. If you say to yourself, I want to go to medical school, study for those exams, whether that's the MCAT, get your exams in order, whether you need to do another degree to kind of make your application better. Surround yourself with people who are doing what you want to do. So whether that means you're volunteering with doctors in their clinic, whether you're shadowing them, getting any type of experience that can aid you in your application for medical school, do that. Never stop learning, and never give up. That's all I would say. Never give up. If it's something that you really, really want to do, and people come up to message me all the time and they ask the same question, and I'm just telling them, continue pressing on, continue pressing on. There will be doors that will open for you, but don't give up.
Yeah, it's important to have vision in mind, to be persistent and to persevere. So what has been some of the most beneficial advice that you have received, Janae, as we conclude? What has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received from your parents, from a teacher, or whatever the case may be? What's been some of the most beneficial advice? What replays in your mind when you have hard days, or what keeps you going?
So recently, I will say, my parents give me advice all the time, and they give some of the greatest advice. But one of the best advice that I've received recently, and that I've just been implementing recently, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, but one of the best advice is that always ask, always shoot your shot, and for me, as I am transitioning, about to graduate and figuring out what I'm going to do
for residency.
Yes, it's never be afraid to ask someone. Shoot your shot. If you want something, go after something and ask. Don't be afraid of no, because people will tell you no a bunch of times, but all you need is one yes. All you need is one yes. And so for me, that's been working. I have just been shooting my shot. I've been asking for help. I've been, seeking out these mentors and not being afraid of hearing the word no, because when you hear the word yes, that one yes can change your life. And I think that applies to so many things in life. And it's like, the Bible tells you to ask, to knock. And you have to be confident and do that. And I have found that a lot of people in this world, they've gotten to where they've gotten, not because they're qualified. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't qualified, but a lot of people have gotten to where they've gotten because they have not been afraid to ask.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to be afraid. You have to not be afraid to ask, because closed mouths do not get fed.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
And just as we conclude, I'll just say this: these words were credited to Mother Teresa. People are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find sincerity, serenity, and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give your best anyway. In the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Thank you, Janae, so much for joining me today. It was so good to have you on. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I. Okay, this is another addendum to the episodes entitled The Journey to Narcolepsy Success. This is another addendum. We're going to be talking about agonists and antagonists and all the different flavors. So agonists are drugs that bind to a cell's receptor in order to mimic the effect of a substance the body naturally produces that binds to the same receptor. Two main classes of receptor ligands in pharmacology. You have agonists and antagonists, and the references for this episode will be listed in the episode description. So agonists tend to be smaller molecules that affect the activation of receptors. Note, this may result in stimulation or inhibition of the cell and organ function. Full agonists produce maximal biological response. Full agonists produce maximal biological response. Has maximal positive intrinsic activity, aka efficacy. Partial agonists, whereas partial agonists produce partial maximal biological response as compared to full agonists. So partial agonists produce partial maximal biological response. Partial agonists have lower positive intrinsic activity, and they may competitively inhibit full agonists, preventing maximal biological response. So let's run through that again. Full agonists produce maximal biological response. It has maximal positive intrinsic activity, so efficacy. And partial agonists produce partial maximal biological response as compared to full agonists. They have lower positive intrinsic activity, and they may competitively inhibit full agonists, preventing maximal biological response. If the partial agonist is bound to a receptor, the full agonist typically cannot bind. Why use a partial agonist? Full agonists may cause too much activation, resulting in toxicity or receptor adaptation or prolonged use, like desensitization and downregulation. The lower efficacy of partial agonists minimizes these complications. Now you also have inverse agonists. These produce opposite biological response to that of the endogenous agonist. Has negative intrinsic activity. Okay. So let's talk about antagonists. Antagonists tend to be larger molecules producing inhibitory effects. An inhibitory effect. There are antagonists that act at the receptor, also known as receptor antagonists. So let's make sure we keep this thing in focus. So antagonists, by definition, have zero intrinsic activity. Antagonists, by definition, have zero intrinsic activity. Full agonists have intrinsic activity of 100%. maximum biological response. Partial agonists have intrinsic activity greater than 0 but less than 100. Partial agonists can competitively inhibit a full agonist. You also have inverse agonists, so you have intrinsic activity less than 0. And then you also have non-competitive antagonists, and those can be unsurmountable, depending on them being irreversible, allosteric. We will get to that. So let's keep going. Just a quick note, efficacy is referring to different levels of biological response or intracellular signaling when they occupy the same receptor. Intrinsic activity refers to the maximal possible effect that can be produced by a drug. Intrinsic activity is determined by the drug-receptor relationship for a drug that acts on the receptor. Okay, you also have efficacy. You also have affinity, which is the measure of the ability of the drug to bind to its molecular target. So the affinity is the measure of the ability of the drug to bind to its molecular target. The VC50, which is the measure of the potency of the drug. So let's keep going. Antagonists. They tend to be larger molecules exhibiting inhibitory effects. There are antagonists that act at the receptor. These are known as receptor antagonists. Antagonists do not have intrinsic activity. They simply block the agonist from binding. So if we think about these things on a spectrum, we think about efficacy related to the endogenous ligand. You have a full inverse agonist at less than 0, a partial inverse agonist still less than 0. You have your antagonist at 0, and you have your partial agonist, which is greater than 0 and less than 100. We're talking about intrinsic activity, and then you have your full agonist at 100%. Okay, intrinsic activity, positive intrinsic activity. So competitive antagonists, reversible or surmountable, binds to receptor at the same site as the endogenous or pharmacological agonist, blocking agonist binding and therefore receptor activation. So it binds to receptor at the same site as an endogenous or pharmacological agonist, blocking agonist binding and therefore receptor activation. Okay, so if you were to look at the plot of an agonist versus agonist effect, when you include the competitive antagonist, it shifts to the right. These are ideal scenarios, of course. Okay, antagonism can be reversed by increasing the amount or dose of agonist. Thus, we have the surmountability. This is talking about competitive antagonists. So competitive antagonists do not affect agonist efficacy. They do decrease affinity and potency. So competitive antagonists do not affect agonist efficacy. They do decrease affinity and potency. Competitive antagonists have affinity or potency for the receptor, but not intrinsic activity. By definition, an antagonist does not have intrinsic activity. Receptors can interact with agonists or the competitive antagonists. Okay. And that is exclusive. Okay, non-competitive receptor antagonists. Non-competitive receptor antagonists. Non-competitive receptor antagonists, unsurmountable. So irreversible, binds to the same site as the agonist, not easily displaced, generally irreversible due to the covalent bonds between the antagonist and the receptor, reducing the number of receptors available to the agonist. So just a quick aside, picture a graph of an agonist versus a biological response with your minimum toxic concentration referenced and noted, and your minimum effective concentration referenced and noted. So let's just think about that. Think about that. And you have your MEC below and your MTC above. So MTC, minimum toxic concentration, minimum effective concentration. This is just picture this graph with these points noted on it. Okay. So with the full agonist and partial agonist starting at the same XY point, ideally, The partial agonist will plateau between the MTC and MEC, the minimum toxic concentration and minimum effective concentration, whereas the full agonist will have a higher biological response and plateau higher. Okay, let's keep going. In the absence of stereoreceptors, the dose response curve will show lower maximum when the agonist is combined with a non-competitive antagonist. However, in the presence of stereoreceptors, there's gradually or gradated upon increasing non-competitive antagonists, a decrease in agonist effect. So, however, in the presence of stereoreceptors, there's gradually or gradated upon increasing non-competitive antagonists, a decrease in agonist effect. So, allosteric non-competitive antagonists. So, allosteric is referring to the other side, and orthosterics is referring to the right binding site. So binding to the allosteric site modifies the conformation of the primary site, with negative allosteric antagonists resulting in an altered conformation that's less responsive to the agonist. So let's wrap this up. Physiological antagonists, molecules that do not bind the same receptor and as the endogenous ligand, but produce an effect opposite to the agonist effect. Molecules that do not bind the same receptor of the endogenous ligand, but produce an effect opposite to the agonist effect. So this is the physiological antagonist. Now a chemical antagonist, as we conclude. Drugs do not interact with agonist receptor, but rather reduce the concentration of the agonist by forming a chemical complex. Let's go through that again. Physiological antagonists, molecules that do not bind the same receptor of the endogenous ligand, but produce an effect. Opposite to the agonist effect. Chemical antagonists, drugs do not interact with agonist receptor, but rather reduce the concentration of an agonist by forming a chemical complex. So hopefully this helped. These are important terms. It's important to know these things. These are like in a way, these are very important, very, very important. So all the best. Take care. This is the conclusion of this addendum. Okay, welcome to the New Chemist Podcast, episode 3C. We go back to the basics and discuss fundamental ideas that support an understanding of pharmacy ideas. And we're using the format of a telephone conversation. This is definitely an episode worth listening to. So it's important to note that the purpose of these episodes are not at all medical advice, medical suggestions, or medical counsel. These are aimed to provide support for pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Again, please note that these are not at all medical advice, medical suggestions, or medical counsel. Please see your local state and board certified physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner, and pharmacist for medical advice and suggestions. Once again, these are not at all for medical advice, suggestions, or counsel. Please see your local state and board certified physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner, and pharmacist for medical advice, suggestions, and counsel. The views in this podcast represent those of my guests and I. So, pharmacy school is a blast. However, you must be very dedicated and maintain a good integration of your self-care regimen, as well as your personal affairs, as well as your academic responsibilities. So let's run through a few quick facts and then we'll conclude this episode for today. So pharmacokinetics, it's what the body does to the drug. We're talking about absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion over time. What's the goal of pharmacokinetics? We want to control the amount of drug exposure. So let's talk about respiratory alkalosis. It involves a rise in blood pH due to hyperventilation, so that's excessive breathing, and a resulting decrease in carbon dioxide. Let's talk about acidosis. What is it? Blood pH lower than 7.35. So let's also talk about extravascular drug absorption. that involves oral, stomach, absorbing the intestine, metabolizing the liver. Some amount of drug reaches the systemic circulation, and the rest of the drug is excreted. Let's talk about intravascular drug absorption. Actually, we'll come back to that. Let's talk about the first pass effect. The initial metabolism in the liver of a drug absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract before the drug reaches systemic circulation through the bloodstream. Let's say that again. First pass effect. The initial metabolism in the liver of a drug absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract before the drug reaches systemic circulation through the bloodstream. Let's also talk about enterohepatic cycling. Drugs are transported through the bile back to the intestine, where they can be reabsorbed in the intestines, increasing the duration of action. One more time. Enterohepatic recycling. Drugs are transported through the bile back to the intestine, where they can be reabsorbed in the intestines, increasing the duration of action. So when we administer intravenously, we have 100% bioavailability. Intravascular administration involves IV as well as intraarterial. Local activity will involve things like general pulmonary, topical, ocular, intraocular. Systemic activity will involve things like oral, sublingual, buccal, intramuscular, subcutaneous. Selective beta blockers. So we're just running through a litany of facts that are useful. It's primarily under the umbrella of pharmacy basics. So just running through some ideas quickly, just to give people a quick refresher for those who are in training this time. Selective beta blockers: metoprolol, atenolol, all, bisoprolol, nebivolol, acebutolol, betaxolol, esmolol. How is the drug absorbed? Active transport with transport proteins or passive diffusion. So we already mentioned how intravascular administration involves intravenous and intraarterial. Let's see, what else can we talk about? So let's talk about dissolution. It's the process of drugs dissolving in the GI tract. Dissolution rate, we look at the Noyes-Whitney equation. Smaller the particle size, the greater the absorption. Increasing the surface area increases the drug absorption. Let's make a quick note of that. Dissolution rate, we look at the Noyes-Whitney equation. Smaller the particle size, the greater the absorption. Increasing the surface area increases the drug absorption. Almost rhymes. Now, how to limit drug degradation? You have your enteric coating, biodegradable polymers, so a acidic environment in the stomach won't destroy the drug, increasing the amount of drug absorption. Bioavailability. Amount of drug available systemically to produce an effect. So how much of the drug is available in the drug to produce a therapeutic effect? So how much is available to produce a therapeutic effect? So formula: percent of drug absorbed. The amount appears in systemic circulation or the amount administered. High bioavailability is above 70%. Low bioavailability is below 10%. Let's go back to that again. Formula: percent of drug absorbed. Amount appears in systemic circulation over the amount administered. So amount appears in systemic circulation over the amount administered. High bioavailability is above 70%, whereas low bioavailability is below 10%. So let's see. Let's give an example. So if we have if we administered 100 milligrams of a drug orally, and 20 milligrams appears in systemic circulation, 20 over 100 is the same thing as 0.2. Multiply by 100 when we're talking about percent, it gives us 20%. Okay. And from the framework that we just discussed, that will give you an idea as to what extent or what amount of bioavailability is occurring with that problem. So drugs with 100% oral bioavailability: levofloxacin, linezolid. So those are examples of two. So formula for bioavailability: area under the plasma, concentration time curve representing total drug exposure. That's a mouthful. Let's go over that again. Formula for bioavailability: area under the plasma, concentration time curve representing total drug exposure. Okay, there are formulas for that. We can discuss that later. So, what are the physical chemical properties that affect drug distribution? Lipophilicity. Lipids can easily cross the membrane. All the things that affect this drug distribution: molecular weight, ionization status. The charged particles cannot pass, non-charged particles can pass, and protein binding. So lipophilicity, molecular weight, ionization status, and protein binding. So LIMP, L-I-M-P, lipophilicity, ionization status, molecular weight, protein binding. Those are the lens to which you look at, or basically the parameters that you kind of look at when you're trying to determine understand what's affecting drug distribution. Also, let's go back to the formula for bioavailability. 100 times AUC subscript EX over AUC subscript IV times dose subscript IV over dose EX. So it's important to note that EX is referring to extravascular, IV is referring to intravenous, AUC is referring to area under the curve. 100 is being used because we're talking about percent, and F is absolute bioavailability. Let's run that back one more time. F is absolute bioavailability. We multiply by 100 because we're talking about percent. AUC is area under the curve. IV is referring to intravenous. EX is referring to extravascular. So F is 100 times AUC EX over AUC IV, and that whole thing is multiplied by dose IV over dose EX. So high protein binding. Drug has high affinity for albumin, so the amount of free drug will be low. The albumin acts as a reservoir for the drug, and it releases the free drug in small amounts to the tissue to exert its effect. This increases the duration of action. High protein binding. Drug has a high affinity for albumin, so the amount of free drug will be low. The albumin acts as a reservoir for the drug, and it releases the free drug in small amounts to the tissue to exert its effect. This increases the duration of action. 28. Albumin. So protein in the blood that's made in the liver. So let's keep going. When a correction form, site-specific drug delivery. Antibodies bind to particular receptors on specific tissues or organs. Site-specific drug delivery involves antibodies binding to particular receptors on specific tissues or organs. So when are correction formulas needed? Highly bound protein drugs with patients whose serum albumin is low. Examples of highly protein bound drugs: phenytoin, warfarin. Examples of those. Let's look and see. What else can we talk about? Calcium corrected formula. So calcium, in brackets, reported serum plus, in brackets, 4.0, subtracting the albumin amount, and that difference is multiplied by 0.8. Phenytoin corrected formula. Total phenytoin measured over, in brackets, 0.2 times the albumin amount plus 0.1. So the product of 0.2 times the albumin amount in the bracket added to 0.1. The whole thing is a denominator under the numerator, which is total phenytoin measured. So volume of distribution. This is the amount of drug in body over plasma drug concentration. Okay, so small volume of distribution involves it being confined to plasma or extracellular space. Example, tobramycin, 0.2 liters per kilogram. Large volume distribution, wide distribution to all body tissues, so the plasma drug concentration is low. Tetracycline is an example of that, 7 to 9 liters per kilogram. So guys, what kind of volume of distribution would you want a drug to have if you were treating a systemic infection? You can think about that, process that in your healthcare profession class or science class. Okay. Let's see what else to talk about. So metabolism involves the process by which a drug is converted from its original chemical structure to other chemical forms. The original chemical form is the parent drug. Other chemical forms, metabolites, occurs primarily in gut and liver. You want the drug to be lipophilic so it can cross the phospholipid bilayer and exert its effects on the tissues. The body undergoes multiple biological reactions to make these intermediates hydrophilic so that they can be excreted by the body. Okay, so lidocaine undergoes extensive first-pass metabolism in the liver, so it's only administered, or typically administered in the intravenous form. Okay. Excretion, irreversible removal of the drug from the body. Organs for excretion, you have the kidneys, and that results. Kidneys function to produce urine. The gut, GI tract, basically functions to produce feces. Lungs function to produce exhaled air. The skin functions to produce sweat. The liver functions to produce bile. So clearance is defined as the volume of plasma cleared of a drug over a period of time. Clearance is defined as the volume of plasma cleared of a drug over a period of time. Okay, two formulas for clearance involve the rate of elimination over concentration. Also, F times dose over area under the curve. Okay, so half-life, the time in which 50% of the drug is eliminated, T1/2. So first order elimination, constant percentage of drug is removed per unit time. The drug concentration is eliminated, and that's directly proportional to the concentration of the drug. Okay. Let's see what else we can talk about. Let's see. So, zero order elimination, the constant amount of drug is eliminated per unit time. So Michaelis-Menten kinetics, this is like, if you've done biochemistry and you're now in the pharmacy program, this is an idea that you see over and over and over again. So, let's think. Michaelis-Menten kinetics, you have your mixed studies, saturable or non-linear kinetics. Increasing the dose leads to disproportionate increase in concentration. First section of the curve, lots of available enzymes. Second section, composition of enzymes, more drugs and binding sites available on enzyme. Third section, all the active sites on the enzymes are occupied. The drug is not being metabolized, leading to toxicity. So let's keep going. Km, concentration at half max of Vmax. Michaelis-Menten drugs, phenytoin, theophylline, voriconazole. Okay, let's keep going. It's important to note that let's just talk about a quick case scenario. The patient has been using phenytoin 100 milligrams 3 times daily. So TID, the phenytoin level was drawn and found to be 8.8 micrograms per milliliter, reference range 10 to 20 micrograms per milliliter. The prescriber doubled the dose to 20 milligrams 3 times daily, so TID. The patient started to slur words, felt fatigue, and returned to the clinic. The level was repeated and found to be 23.7 micrograms per milliliter. Which of the following is accurate regarding the most likely reason for the change in phenytoin level? So, what we understand is phenytoin metabolism can become saturated at higher doses. Phenytoin metabolism can become saturated at higher doses. Saturation point. Let's keep going now. Saturation point. Adding more substrate will make no difference in the reaction rate. Good rule of thumb for phenytoin: if there is 7 micrograms per milliliter in the serum, adjust doses in small increments, no more than 30 to 50 milligrams at a time. So KE is the elimination rate constant. Let's see. The loading dose. Use of a higher dose than what is usually used for treatment to allow the drug to reach concentration that exerts the therapeutic effect. As we progress, one of these episodes, we'll spend some time talking about therapeutic effects and therapeutic indices, therapeutic windows. Okay, so let's keep going. We're going to talk about some pharmacology basics now. Pharmacology is the body of knowledge concerned with the actions of chemicals on biological systems. What is medical pharmacology? It involves the use of chemicals in prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of disease. What is toxicology? It is concerned with the undesirable effects of chemicals on biological systems. What is pharmacokinetics? It involves what the body does to the drug. You have your ADME, your absorption, your distribution, your metabolism, your excretion. What is pharmacodynamics? How I think about this is when I look at the word, D comes with 4 of the letters, M, A, and N. So it's what the drug does to the body, or drug does to the mind. That's how I see it. That's how I process this. So pharmacodynamics, what the drug does to the body. What is onset of action? Is how much of the drug comes into circulation to produce the effect, determined by the route of administration and drug dosage. When you increase the drug dosage, the concentration of drug in the body will also increase. So what is onset of action? Is how much of the drug comes into circulation to produce effect. The effect, determined by the route of administration and drug dosage. When you increase drug dosage, the concentration of drug in the body will also increase. So what is duration of action affected by, or what can be affected by? The drug dosage, or higher the dosage. It also can be affected by the rate of distribution, the rate of metabolism, and the rate of excretion. So MEC, minimum effective concentration. It's the amount of drug required to produce a therapeutic effect. So what is the duration of action? It's a time between the rise to the decline at minimum effective concentration for therapeutic effect. What is the MOA, the mechanism of drug action? Drugs cannot produce any new action in the body, can act on enzymes, ion channels, upregulate or downregulate the system within the body. So there are some more things we want to talk about. Ligands, so they're signaling molecules, RA, receptor existing in the active state, RI, receptor existing in the inactive state. Depending on whether you read, some people refer to, like in biochemistry, is referred to, they use different letters to describe those things in undergrad biochemistry. But for now, in this phase, we'll talk about RA being a receptor existing in an active state, RI, receptor existing in an inactive state. So the external receptor site. Ligands bind outside plasma membrane and produces change inside the cell. These are elegantly displayed with receptor proteins on the phospholipid bilayer. So internal receptor site. Drugs go inside the cell, bind the receptor inside the cell, moves to the nucleus to produce desired effect. So mechanisms of agonist-mediated activation. You have your ion channels, your GPCRs, wonderful group class of receptors, just excellent, wonderful family, if you will. Receptor tyrosine kinases, intracellular hormone receptors. So those are things you want to like focus in on. Ion channel, ligand, gated voltage, gated second messenger regulated. Ligand gated ion channel, drug binds the ion channel, activating it to open. Sodium enters, triggering an action potential. Voltage gated ion channel, change in charge or potential between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, causing the channels to open to maintain internal homeostasis. Inside the cell, the charge is between negative 70 millivolts and negative 90 millivolts to open the gate to maintain internal homeostasis. Okay, let's go. Second messenger regulated. Various second messengers are regulated certain channels by opening and closing them. Some include calcium and cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP can cause the activation of enzymes which trigger signal transduction pathways. So your GPCRs, your guanine protein coupled receptors, a signal receptor protein in the plasma membrane that responds to the binding of a signal molecule by activating a G protein, also called a G protein linked receptor. Your RTKs, receptor tyrosine kinases. Insulin binds to tyrosine kinase receptor. Tyrosine kinase receptor undergoes autophosphorylation. Insulin receptor is activated. Downstream cascade of signals. Final signal is to recruit glucose transporters, GLUT. Move from cytosol to plasma membrane and take these into tissues for utilization or storage. So let's talk about some amino acids for a bit. Just for a quick bit, we know some amino acids with hydroxyl groups are your serine, tyrosine, and threonine. So serine, if you go from the peptide backbone and walk down the R group, you have, so serine has the methionine spacer, and hydroxyl tyrosine has your methionine spacer, your benzyl ring, and then your hydroxyl, and threonine has a methine spacer, then a methyl group that comes off from that, and then a hydroxyl group. Okay, so kinase is then going to cause this phosphorylation. If you want to look up the spacers in terms of methionine, TH2, methine, CH, is what we're referring to. We say those spacers. That's kind of organic chemistry talk, or speak, if you will, for those who are organic chemistry majors or who study some organic chemistry. So let's talk about kinases, enzymes that cause phosphorylation. So intracellular hormone receptor, mostly steroids, enter the cell easily because they are lipids, bind to receptors inside the cellular cytoplasm, get activated, move to the nucleus, cause DNA transcription, which leads to the formation of particular proteins. So affinity, the measure of tightness in which a drug binds to a receptor. What is intrinsic activity? So the ability of a drug to activate a receptor upon binding. An agonist. There's a drug that mimics the action of the endogenous ligand. Primary agonist. Drug binds the same recognition site as the endogenous agonist. So I've heard of allosteric, but this was a new one for me. Orthosteric. Orthosteric site, the primary or the right binding site. Allosteric agonist binds to a different region of the receptor. So allosteric is referring to another. That's what that word means, literally. Antagonist, drugs that block or reduce the activity of an agonist. So antagonist blocks the agonist. Agonist. And these have affinity but no intrinsic activity. And remember, intrinsic activity is the ability of a drug to activate a receptor upon binding. Asymptotic interaction. Competition with agonists for the same overlapping site. Asymptotic interaction. Competition with agonists for the same or overlapping site. You got your physical antagonist. Physically interacts and nullifies the action of the drug. Example, charcoal, which is a good absorbent. It binds alkaloid to form a complex and will be excreted. The chemical antagonist, the drug forms compounds with other substances like calcium and magnesium. Example, tetracycline binds to calcium in milk and then will be eliminated. You have your physiological antagonist, a drug that counters the effects of another by binding to a different receptor and causing opposing effects. Drugs that produce an opposite action by binding to a different receptor. Example, adrenaline is a physiological antagonist to histamine because adrenaline causes bronchodilation and histamine causes bronchoconstriction. Pharmacological antagonists. The drug that binds to the receptor and produces no effect and shows no intrinsic activity. And remember, intrinsic activity is basically the ability of a drug to activate a receptor upon binding. Partial agonists. A drug that binds to a receptor and causes a response as less than that caused by a full agonist. You have your inverse agonists. In the stomach, histamine receptors are constitutively activated. They're activated without stimulus. So under normal conditions, they're operating at 20%. Reverse agonist inhibits these receptors, bringing them down to 0%. Competitive agonists, same binding site alatness, resembles chemically with agonists. You have a right shift on the dose-response curve. Response depends on concentration. So your dose and response, your dose can be considered like your X value. Your response can be considered like your Y value, if you will. So you plot. So non-competitive agonists, different binding site of agonists, not resemble chemically, a downshift shift of dose-response curve. Increasing agonist concentration won't make a difference. So one more time, non-competitive agonists, you have a different binding site of agonists, not resembled chemically, you have a downward shift of the dose-response curve. Increasing agonist concentration won't make a difference in this case, or in that case. So how do we activate receptor sites? You open or close ion channels, speed up or slow down transporters, increase or decrease enzyme activity. So efficacy. What is efficacy? It is the maximum effect a drug can produce. It can be measured with a graded dose response curve. Potency is the amount of drug needed to produce a given effect, determined by affinity of the receptor for the drug. So EC50, the dose is required for an individual to experience 50% of the maximum effect. ED50, the dose required to produce a therapeutic effect in 50% of the population. Median effective dose. So your therapeutic index, it's a ratio. It compares the blood concentration at which a drug becomes toxic and the concentration at which the drug is effective. Your LD50 over your ED50. 10 to 1 safer drug because it has a wider therapeutic index. 3 to 1 more dangerous drugs needs more attention because the therapeutic index is narrow. LD50, median lethal dose. So tolerance. What is tolerance? Reduced response to drug after prolonged use, develops gradually over a long period of time. For example, alcoholics need more alcohol on the second day to feel the same effect from the first. If it's accustomed to alcohol, so they're intense already. So let's talk about pharmacokinetic tolerance. It involves the enhanced enzymatic breakdown. It reduces the amount of drug reaching its site of action. Example, barbiturates, carbamazepine, reduce their own metabolism. So oil metabolism or oil destruction on frequent repeated use. So pharmacodynamic tolerance. So you had your pharmacokinetic tolerance. Let's talk about pharmacodynamic tolerance. It is the tolerance caused by altered nervous system sensitivity, change in receptors. It involves the action of drug as being reduced because of downregulation of receptors, meaning that receptor expression or the amount of receptor present will be less. The receptor is not as active as before, or it involves the sensitization of receptors, meaning the receptors will not function as well. So proteins could go through PTMs or post-translational modifications, meaning that they lose, for example, a sulfide due to the drug use, losing their function. Some changes are reversible, others are not. And internalization, and that internalization of receptors, so receptor will not be available, and exhaustion of mediators, depletion of catecholamine or epinephrine as well. So natural inherent tolerance involves the genetic makeup, makes an individual resistant or will have more response to a drug. Acquired tolerance occurs in repeated use of drug. Tolerance develops to sedative action of chlorpromazine, but not its antipsychotic action. Tolerance occurs to sedative action of phenobarbital, but not to its anti-epileptic action. So cross tolerance. Development of tolerance to pharmacologically related drugs. Example, partial tolerance between morphine and barbiturates. And then you also have complete cross tolerance between morphine and pethidine, same drug class. So what is tachyphylaxis? It's a type of tolerance that occurs rapidly within minutes or seconds when it takes a small concentration of drug to cause this. So what are some drugs that have a low or narrow therapeutic index? You have your acetaminophen, your theophylline, carbamazepine, digoxin, warfarin, lithium, phenytoin, gentamicin, vancomycin, antidepressants, bicyclic insulin. Let's talk some more. And what are your drugs with the narrow therapeutic index? Acetaminophen, theophylline, carbamazepine, digoxin, warfarin, lithium, phenytoin, gentamicin, vancomycin, antidepressants, bicyclic insulin. So drugs with a higher wide therapeutic index are your NSAIDs, your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, your benzodiazepines, most antibiotics, furosemide, and your SSRIs. So nitroglycerin can cause tolerance. As a pharmacist, you must tell the patient they need to have a 10 to 12 nitrate-free period to prevent tolerance. Nitroglycerin causes vasodilation. Let's keep going. Synergism. One drug is going to have an additive effect with another drug, increasing efficacy. Action of one drug is facilitated or increased by another drug, or when one drug is inactive alone but active when combined with another. Additive, the effect of two drugs in the same direction. Example, amlodipine. Okay, so let's keep going. So we also have, so example, do you have the additive, the effect of two drugs in the same direction? Example, amlodipine and atenolol, all antihypertensive. Amlodipine is a calcium channel blocker, and atenolol is a beta blocker. Both work to reduce hypertension and act on different places in the heart. You have glibenclamide, and metformin. Hypoglycemic glibenclamide is a sulfonylurea that increases insulin receptor sensitivity and causes secretion of insulin, acts on pancreas. Metformin acts on liver to control blood glucose level. So super additive, otherwise known as potentiation. The effect of the combination is greater than the individual effects of each component. Acetylcholine and physostigmine. Acetylcholine acts on muscle-produced effect. Physostigmine is inactive. Both are degraded by acetylcholinesterase. When acetylcholine is alone, the enzyme will break it down quickly. You have physostigmine. With it, the enzyme doesn't know which one to attack. Competition between the two, so it increases the duration of acetylcholine. Levodopa and carbidopa. Levodopa treats Parkinson's disease by converting to dopamine to prevent movement disorder. When taken orally, levodopa is converted to dopamine in the intestine, causing adverse effects like nausea and vomiting. Give it with carbidopa. which prevents the breakdown of the intestines. So it can be transported to the brain, across the blood-brain barrier, where it can be converted to dopamine to act on the basal ganglia, to sulfamethoxazole / trimethoprim. Inhibits two enzymes, inflammation of tetrahydrofolic acid, which is required for bacterial cell wall synthesis. If you want to kill the bacteria, you need sulfamethoxazole to prevent the conversion of PABA to an intermediate product. And then you need trimethoprim to prevent the conversion of the intermediate product to tetrahydrofolic acid. So enalapril and hydrochlorothiazide. Enalapril, angiotensin-converting enzyme angiotensin-converting inhibitor. Hydrochlorothiazide, diuretic, acts in two different places to produce the antihypertensive effect. So let's wrap this up. Drug action and enzymology. So the ES is referring to your enzyme substrate complex. The enzyme, a type of protein that speeds up a chemical reaction in a living thing. Enzymes are globular proteins, very specific. Substrate, reactant, EP, enzyme product complex, irreversible inhibition of enzymes caused by covalent bonds. Enzymes cannot be regenerated. The only way the product can be catalyzed is when new enzyme molecules are produced in the body. Reversible inhibition of enzymes. Enzymes can be freed from the complex to give the active enzyme. Ka, association constant of ligand with receptor site. Kd, association constant for the receptor. EC50, drug concentration given a response halfway between the baseline and maximum. IC50, concentration which produces 50% of the maximum possible inhibitory response, which is equal to the quantal response. Quantal response equals IC50. So affinity, the ability of a compound to bind tightly to the target. Intrinsic activity, the drug's ability to produce an effect once bound to the receptor. Potency, the amount of drug needed to produce an effect. The more potent the drug, the steeper the slope on the DRC, or the dose response curve. Efficacy. So efficacy, the potential maximum therapeutic response a drug can have. Example, furosemide eliminates more salt and water than chlorothiazide, so furosemide has a higher efficacy. Okay, so efficacy, the potential maximum therapeutic response a drug can produce. Allosteric site, or allostery is referring to another, it's a site the drugs bind to that exerts their activity that's not the actual receptor site of the endogenous ligand. So isosteric, which is a nice word, replacement of modifications of functional groups with other groups having similar properties. So replacement or modifications of functional groups with other groups having similar properties. It tunes, make sure you remember that word, tunes the drug metabolism, receptor fit distribution, and other properties. So bioisosterism, swapping out functional groups present in the chemical compound while maintaining the desired biological activity. Corrects undesired properties. So let's wrap this up. This involves starting with the parent compound and using isosteres which can involve slightly changing the structure to make more desirable structures. These are analogs. So isoters of hydrogen, fluorine, isoters of fluorine, hydroxyl, amine, so NH2 or CH3, brackets H, isoters of carbon, isoters of hydroxyl, amine, isoters of sulfur hydroxyl, isoters of fluorine, and trifluoromethyl. So this is the end of the episode.
Pharmaceutical chemistry. Cholinergic agents. Cholinergic agents are the most well-studied chemical neurotransmitter system. Cholinergic agonists include the cholinomimetic and parasympathomimetic agents. These agents act directly on the cholinergic receptors and exhibit agonist activity, or they exhibit indirect effects as inhibitors of acetylcholinesterase, ACE. Now, with cholinergic antagonists, these include cholinolytics and parasympatholytic agents. These bind to the cholinergic receptors and block the receptor activity. Cholinergic agents are used for a variety of disease states, including Alzheimer's disease. Cholinergic receptors are divided into muscarinic receptors or nicotinic receptors, depending upon their binding preference either to muscarine or nicotine. These can be further divided into receptor subtypes. Muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, noted as MACRs, include the superfamily of G-protein coupled receptors. Whereas nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, noted as NACRs, are cationic transmembrane ligand-gated ion channels that allow that passage of sodium and potassium ions. It is important to note that muscarine has 3 chiral centers, only the 2s, 3R, 5s, configuration provides potent receptor binding. Muscarine can exist as 8 stereoisomers according to the Bell-Van 't Hoff rule. Furthermore, there are receptor subtypes and locations associated with these receptor subtypes. Muscarinic acetylcholine receptors subtypes include M1 to M5, found in the central nervous system, and other tissues including the salivary glands, stomach, heart, smooth muscle, and others. It is important to note that organs may contain multiple receptor subtypes. The M1 receptor is sometimes referred to as neural receptor because of its abundance in cerebral cortex, hippocampus, and other areas. The M1 receptor is implicated in Alzheimer's disease, with M1 agonist functioning to improve memory and learning. The M2 receptors are predominantly found in the heart and M3 receptors and are most abundant in the smooth muscles. Remember, overactive bladder treatment. The M4 and M5 receptors are predominantly present in the central nervous system and periphery. The nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are present in the central peripheral nervous system and neuromuscular junction. Moving right along, acetylcholine is biosynthesized in the cholinergic neurons by acetyl group transfer form acetyl-CoA. Acetylcholine is actively transported into cytosolic storage vesicles in the presynaptic nerve endings and maintained with ADP, calcium cations, and magnesium cations until released. Moreover, during the conduction of the signal through the neuron, the action potential opens voltage-dependent calcium cation channels, resulting in the release of acetylcholine. Upon release, acetylcholine binds to the postsynaptic membrane. Unbound acetylcholine is hydrolyzed by acetylcholinesterase, ACE. Furthermore, acetylcholine at this time is not orally bioavailable, and has a very short half-life, minutes, and non-selective binding to receptor types or subtypes, which can support a case for it not being a good drug candidate. The early model of acetylcholine binding highlighted the interaction between the quaternary ammonium ion and a carboxylate in the receptor and H bonding with a lone pair of electrons in the ester oxygen with the receptor. Yet, the early model does not account or provide sufficient explanations for why 2 of the 3 alkyl groups need to be methyls for optimal activity. Further, the effect of the chiral center or chiral centers on binding potency. Moreover, there is a 5-atom distance between the terminal hydrogen in acetate and the quaternary ammonium salt, which is related to Ing's rule of 5. Keep this in mind. In the current model of receptor binding, the quaternary nitrogen has an ionic interaction with an aspartate residue, D105, in the receptor, while the ester oxygens including both the sp2 and sp3 hybridized oxygens, are involved in hydrogen bonding interactions with threonine specifically, T189, and tyrosine, Y381, residues in the receptor. Let's talk about Newman projections and acetylcholine. The protein crystallographic studies indicate that the preferred conformation for acetylcholine to bind the muscarinic receptor is synclinal, or also referred to as gauche. Keep it going. Let's talk about acetylcholine structure and activity relationships. Having an understanding of the SAR or structure-activity relationships of acetylcholine, functions to improve biological activity, pharmacokinetics, and the toxicological profile, and selectivity, and other aspects. Variations can occur with the acetoxy moiety, acetate ester, ethylene, 2-carbon bridge, and the quaternary ammonium salt. It is known that replacing the acetate ester with longer chain carbons results in the loss of binding potency. Moreover, conversion of the acetate ester into an amide led to the discovery of two active drugs, carbachol and bethanechol. Continuing on with acetylcholine structure-activity relationships, SAR, both carbachol and bethanechol are carbamates. There is chirality. Both carbachol and bethanechol are muscarinic acetylcholine receptor agonists and display improved muscarinic versus nicotinic receptor selectivity as compared to acetylcholine. First, carbachol or carbamylcholine is primarily used for various ophthalmic purposes, such as treatment of glaucoma as it can reduce the ocular pressure, or during ophthalmic surgery due to its ability to constrict the pupils. It is usually dispensed as eye drops. Second, bethanechol is used to alleviate dry mouth. Moreover, bethanechol can also be used to treat urinary retention resulting from anesthetics, diabetic neuropathy of the bladder, or a side effect from antidepressants. Third, with the acetylcholine structure-activity relationship, let's talk about the ethylene bridge modifications. The lengthening of the 2-carbon, ethylene, bridge between the acetoxy group and the quaternary ammonium salt can result in partial or complete loss of biological activity, Ing's rule of 5. Also, the placement of a methyl group on the beta-carbon atom, which is adjacent to the bridge oxygen and connected to the methyl, that carbon displays muscarinic potency similar to acetylcholine and with much greater muscarinic, nicotinic selectivity. Further, a methyl group of the alpha carbon leads to selective binding to nicotinic receptors, although the potency is less than acetylcholine. Additionally, note that the placement of a methyl group at either the alpha or beta position generates one stereocenter, which can have two stereoisomers given the Le-Bel-Van 't Hoff rule. Moreover, the replacement of hydrogens on the ethylene bridge with alkyl groups larger than methyl significantly reduce biological activity. Additionally, let's talk about the quaternary nitrogen and other modifications. First, the replacement of nitrogen with sulfur, phosphorus, or arsenic yields less active compounds with no clinical utility. It is important to note that only compounds with positively charged atom are effective. This is based in the ionic interaction. Added to this, replacement of all three methyl groups with ethyl groups produce an acetylcholine antagonist. Also, the replacement of only one of the methyl group with bulkier alkyl groups, for example, ethyl group, greatly reduces agonist potency. Furthermore, the replacement of methyl groups by 1 to 3 hydrogens decreases muscarinic agonist activity. Also, within the context of methylcholine chloride, provocholine, these facts are true. One introduction of methyl group at the B position creates 0 chiral center, S, which has very little nicotinic activity. 2, S, isomer is 240 times more potent than the R isomer. 3. The placement of the methyl group provides hydrolytic resistance, with two-fold stability compared to acetylcholine. 4. Also it is highly polar, not orally active, cannot cross blood-brain barrier. 5. Used for diagnosing asthma, and in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. 6. This molecule is contraindicated in patients with heart attack, stroke, and uncontrolled hypertension.
MD-P. The flex is dependent on K. The oil to water partition coefficient of the drug, as well as on in brackets C1 minus C2. Rum per ton. Ionization of a weak electrolyte. You know, I always wanted to be an acolyte, a thurifer, a catechist, or a trumpeter, you see. But today we're talking about my good friend, the trumpeter, but let's shot to the air in the ionization. So ionization is affected by pH of the medium in which the drug is dissolved, as well as by the pKa. Remember, non-ionized are like the chemical thugs, more liquid, soluble, the diffusive thug, if you will. They are more liposoluble than the ionized and partitions more readily. Hopefully by now you realize. Rubber tum-tum, let's have a drum roll. Here little beggar boy, oh, that's for the periodic table. Let's talk about the transport process that's not a stable. The octane transport. The octane transport of the drug, with it moving across a concentration gradient, requiring energy, selective potentially, saturation possibility, and competitive it can be. Yet we must look across the whole and see that facilitated diffusion is on the carrier-mediated transport system wards. Facilitated diffusion occurs across a concentration gradient and does not require energy. Obrigada, e você, como você está? Tudo bem, tudo. Wow, fala pequeño português. So let's talk in English, por favor. S'il vous plaît. With that paracellular transport, drug transport across tight, narrow junctions between cells or trans-endothelial channels. No, I'm not talking about fire stick, but let me give you a conceptual trick. Paracellular transport involves both diffusion, unconvective or bulk fill of water, and the accompanying water-soluble drugs to the channels. That can be a hint. Now let's look at the vesicles. Newly minted idea in this lyrical scheme. Vesicular transport is the process of engulfing particles or dissolved materials by a cell. Engulfment. Pino with drinking. Fago with eating. Phagocytosis, engulfment of small solute or fluid volumes. Phagocytosis is engulfment of larger particles, macromolecules, generally by macrophages. Endocytosis and exocytosis are the movement of macromolecules into and out of the cell. Biopharmaceutics and drug delivery. This tennis. So we've reached the end of this lyrical scheme. You see, we'll pick back up conceptually in episode 2. Okay, so big for the number to be receiving further studies as a pharmacist in the US. These episodes again will be under the theme The Journey to Narcotic Success. These will cover in summative form key points that matter to me as I embark on my journey as a pharmacy student on charted course to narcotic success. Note the purpose of these episodes, not at all for advice or medical suggestions, but to provide support for their pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Not at all for medical advice or medical suggestions. Please see a local state and board certified physician, PA or NP, and pharmacist for medical advice and suggestions. The newcomer becomes a pharmacist in training. The journey to narcotic success. The North American Pharmacist Licensure Examination, NAPNEX, is a standard examination created by the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, NABP, to help individual state boards of pharmacy assess an individual's competency and knowledge so they may be given a license to practice. So this is an important exam. So be abbreviations you want to keep in mind as we conclude. UNSP 34, United States Pharmacopoeia 34, and NF, Natural Formulary 29. So, this is the end of the episode. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the New Chemist podcast.
Bienvenidos al podcast del nuevo químico.
Καλώς ήρθατε στο podcast του New Chemist. Welkom bij de podcast van The New Chemist.
Bienvenue sur le podcast du nouveau chimiste.
Bem-vindo ao podcast do novo químico.
Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. Work hard. Be value driven. You can do it. You can grow and learn it. You can be the difference you and your community needs. Don't give up. We are here, rooting and cheering for you. Don't give up.
Travaillez dur. Soyez axé sur la valeur. Tu peux le faire. Vous pouvez grandir et l'apprendre. Vous pouvez être la différence dont vous et votre communauté avez besoin. N'abandonnez pas. Nous sommes ici pour vous encourager et vous encourager. N'abandonnez pas.
Trabalhar duro. Seja orientado por valores. Você consegue. Você pode crescer e aprender. Você pode ser a diferença que você e sua comunidade precisam. Não desista. Estamos aqui torcendo e torcendo por você. Não desista.
Δούλεψε σκληρά. Να οδηγείτε στην αξία. Μπορείς να το κάνεις. Μπορείτε να μεγαλώσετε και να το μάθετε. Μπορείτε να είστε η διαφορά που χρειάζεστε εσείς και η κοινότητά σας. Μην τα παρατάς. Είμαστε εδώ για να σας ζητοκραυγάσουμε. Μην τα παρατάς.
Trabaja duro. Sea impulsado por el valor. Puedes hacerlo. Puedes crecer y aprenderlo. Usted puede ser la diferencia que usted y su comunidad necesitan. No te rindas, estamos aquí animándote y animándote. No te rindas.
Werk hard. Wees waardegedreven. Je kunt het. Je kunt groeien en leren. U kunt het verschil zijn dat u en uw gemeenschap nodig hebben. Geef niet op. We zijn hier om voor je te roten en te juichen. Geef niet op.
Work hard. Be value driven. You can do it. You can grow and learn it. You can be the difference you and your community needs. Don't give up. We are here rooting and cheering for you. Don't give up. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I.